Have you ever felt like you've spent your entire life being different from everyone around you? Have you ever wondered why, even as a child, you always felt safer in silence, more at peace when you were alone, while others seemed to find joy in noise and crowds? And have you ever doubted yourself, thinking that maybe you weren't normal enough, not social enough, simply because you preferred living in your own inner world? If the answer is yes, then this story is for you. Because this isn't just about being introverted. It's about a childhood marked by invisible scars and quiet memories that shaped the way you live, love, and see the world today. The childhood of an introvert rarely begins with loud laughter. It often begins with silence. While other children rush excitedly into groups, shouting and playing in the schoolyard, the introverted child feels most at peace in a quiet corner, watching instead of participating, listening instead of competing to speak. Not because they are afraid of the world, but because they experience it differently, more deeply, more sensitively, and yes, more vulnerably. Yet the world, even the people who love them most, rarely understands this. From an early age, introverted children are often labeled with words that don't truly belong to them: shy, closed off, lacking confidence, antisocial. Each time they hear these labels, they shrink back a little more, grow a little quieter, and start believing that something is wrong with who they are. And that's when a lifelong journey begins, the journey of trying to become who others expect them to be. In the classroom, they are often the child who never raises a hand, even though their mind is overflowing with ideas. At home, they are the quiet one at the dinner table, even though their heart is full of emotions and thoughts. They're constantly told to open up, to speak more, to be more outgoing, as if only then they would be normal. But how can you open your heart when no one truly wants to listen, when people only want you to become a version of yourself that they find easier to accept? That feeling of being different follows them through every moment of childhood. On the playground, they may watch their friends play without feeling lonely. But the disapproving looks from adults make them believe that being alone is wrong. In the classroom, they may stay silent to think deeply, but the teacher labels them passive. At home, they may choose to listen rather than speak. But they are called distant. Over time, this natural difference stops being a source of pride and becomes a burden that makes them question their own worth. Many introverts carry with them a childhood filled with loneliness. Because they feel so deeply, they are also more easily hurt. A criticism that others quickly forget might haunt them for years. A single rejection can make them wary of forming new connections. And when their emotions become too deep to express in words, they choose silence. But that silence is often mistaken for not needing anyone. And so they grow up in a cycle. The more they crave connection, the more they retreat inward. But what the world doesn't know is that within that silence, introverts live a life richer and more vivid than anyone imagines. While they may speak little, inside them is a universe of thoughts, reflections, observations, and feelings. They remember words you said years ago. They sense emotions through a glance. They notice tiny details no one else sees. Yet because the external world rewards loudness, these qualities are often overlooked, or worse, seen as weakness. In truth, they are not weak. They simply live by a different rhythm. They don't want to be the center of every party. They don't need to be the loudest voice in the room. They don't seek to be the most noticeable presence. They simply want to be accepted as they are, without judgment. They want people to understand that silence is also a language, that solitude can also be happiness, and that depth does not equal fragility. The childhood of an introvert is just like that. Gentle but profound, lonely yet full of feeling, misunderstood but quietly strong. And from those seemingly quiet years, they develop a rare and powerful gift, the ability to live fully in their inner world. They learn how to observe rather than just look, how to truly listen rather than just hear, how to feel rather than simply react. And all of this becomes the foundation for the person they will grow into one day. In the next part of this journey, we will look deeper into the emotional wounds that introverts often carry from childhood, wounds that many never notice, yet silently shape every decision, every relationship, and every way they see themselves for the rest of their lives. The memories of childhood are only the beginning. If that period laid the foundation for the introvert's personality and inner world, then the silent wounds formed in those years are what shape how they love, communicate, value themselves, and interact with the world as adults. Talking about those wounds is not about reopening pain, it's about seeing them clearly so we can begin to truly heal. One of the deepest wounds introverts carry is the belief that they are not good enough. It often begins with words that seem harmless. You need to be more outgoing. Why can't you be like your friend? Why aren't you happier? These phrases, repeated over and over throughout childhood, plant a false belief in their minds that who they are is somehow insufficient, that they must change in order to be loved and accepted. And so, they start pretending. Pretending to be more social around friends. Pretending to enjoy conversations they secretly wish would end. Pretending not to be exhausted by the noisy world around them. But the hardest part isn't pretending for others. It's when they begin pretending for themselves. They lose sight of who they are, what they want, and how they truly feel. Another common wound is the fear of rejection. Because they have been misunderstood, judged, and labeled as distant or hard to approach, they grow cautious about opening up. Every time they want to express a feeling, they hesitate, afraid they won't be understood. Every time they want to form a new connection, they stop themselves, afraid of being hurt. They learn to be alone, not because they don't need anyone, but because they believe it's safer that way. Loneliness becomes their comfort zone, but also the invisible wall that separates them from the world. Then there's the compulsion to please others. A child who grows up in an environment where acceptance is always conditional. If you're good, you'll be praised. If you're sociable, you'll be loved. Learns that their value depends on how others see them. And as adults, they carry this belief into their relationships. They feel the need to be nice all the time, to agree even when they disagree, to apologize even when they've done nothing wrong. They smile even when they're hurting inside. They stay silent even when they should speak. They become the good person the world wants, but in the process, they lose their own voice. A subtler but equally powerful wound is the fear of judgment. Because they've been criticized for how they think, feel, and behave, introverts grow up always on guard. Before they act, they ask themselves, will people accept this? Will anyone understand? Will they think I'm weird? That constant self-censorship stops them from pursuing opportunities, from speaking up, from expressing themselves, from living authentically. They withdraw, not because they have no dreams, but because they fear those dreams will be crushed by others' opinions. And slowly, all these wounds layer upon one another. The belief of being not enough leads to insecurity. The fear of rejection leads to avoidance of deep relationships. The need to please leads to self-abandonment. The fear of judgment leads to self-silencing. Beneath their calm exterior, introverts often fight a quiet, internal battle, a battle between the desire to be their true selves and the fear of being hurt if they do. But here's the truth. These wounds are not weaknesses. They are proof that introverts have loved deeply, trusted sincerely, and lived wholeheartedly. They are more deeply wounded because they feel more deeply. They fear loss because they know the value of connection. They hesitate to open up because they truly care. These wounds don't make them weaker. They make them profoundly human. What matters most is realizing that the past does not define the future. Childhood wounds are not chains meant to hold them back forever. Once an introvert begins to confront and understand them, they can learn to let go of guilt for simply being themselves, build healthy boundaries to protect their peace, and open their hearts without fear. Healing doesn't begin with erasing memories. It begins with facing them with gratitude, for they have shaped the depth, kindness, and strength they carry today. When that happens, introverts stop living in the shadows of their past. They step into the light, confident that they are enough, that they are worthy, and that they are strong enough to live as their authentic selves. And that is the very first step in transforming wounds into strength. In the next part, we will explore how these wounds don't just belong to the past. They silently influence the present, shaping how introverts love, build relationships, and even define happiness itself. By the time an introverted child grows into an adult, they may look calm, composed, even self-sufficient on the outside. They may have a stable job, a circle of acquaintances, maybe even a family. But beneath that composed surface lies a far more complex inner world, one that was shaped for better or worse by the invisible wounds of their childhood. And nowhere are those early scars more visible than in the way they love. The first, and perhaps most profound effect, is the way introverts approach intimacy. To them, connection is not something casual or superficial. It is something sacred, something that must be built on trust, understanding, and safety. They do not rush into relationships. They do not fall in love simply because they feel lonely. For an introvert, love is not about filling an empty space. It is about finding someone with whom they can finally exhale, someone they don't have to perform for, someone with whom silence feels as comforting as words. But this depth comes with a shadow. Because they have been misunderstood for so long, introverts often hesitate to show their full selves, even to those they love. They fear that if they reveal too much, their sensitivities, their intense emotions, their need for solitude, they might once again be judged or rejected. And so, they keep parts of themselves hidden. They love deeply but quietly, often without saying the words out loud. They show care through small, thoughtful gestures rather than grand declarations. They listen intently, remember tiny details, and stand by silently during difficult times. But because the world often equates love with visible action and constant expression, their love can go unnoticed, and sometimes even unappreciated. This dynamic becomes even more complicated when they meet someone who doesn't understand their inner world. Many introverts find themselves drawn to extroverted personalities, people who are outgoing, expressive, bold. At first, this can feel magnetic. The extrovert brings energy and excitement, while the introvert offers depth and calm. But over time, cracks can appear. The extrovert might see the introvert's need for space as distance. The introvert might feel overwhelmed by the extrovert's constant need for stimulation. Without deep communication and mutual understanding, what once felt complementary can begin to feel incompatible. Another way childhood wounds shape adult relationships is through attachment and trust. Because many introverts grew up feeling misunderstood or unseen, they may find it difficult to fully trust others. Even when they fall in love, a part of them remains guarded, holding back pieces of their heart, just in case. They might fear abandonment even when there's no reason to. They might question whether they are truly loved or if they're simply being tolerated. They might replay old memories of rejection and project them onto the present. And when conflicts arise, their instinct is often to retreat inward rather than confront. Not because they don't care, but because confrontation has always felt unsafe. This can confuse their partners. Why won't you talk to me? Why do you shut down? Why do you build walls? The partner may ask. But the truth is, those walls were not built overnight. They were built brick by brick during years of misunderstanding, and dismantling them requires patience, compassion, and a willingness to understand the tender heart that hides behind them. For many introverts, love is also complicated by their relationship with solitude. They genuinely need time alone, not as a rejection of others, but as a way to recharge and make sense of their emotions. Yet, society often equates solitude with loneliness or withdrawal. As a result, introverts may feel guilty for needing space, even in loving relationships. They may push themselves to be more present, more social, more available, and end up emotionally exhausted. Over time, this exhaustion can turn into resentment, not toward their partner, but toward themselves for not being able to meet expectations. There's also the lingering impact of that old wound, the belief that they are too much or not enough. In love, this manifests in subtle but powerful ways. They might overanalyze every word they say, fearing they'll upset their partner. They might suppress their needs, believing they don't have the right to ask for more. They might settle for less than they deserve because they think this is all I can get. And in the worst cases, they might sabotage healthy relationships because deep down, they don't believe they're worthy of being loved without conditions. And yet, despite all these struggles, when an introvert loves, they do so with a kind of devotion that is rare and extraordinary. They will remember the little things that make you smile. They will listen, truly listen, to your worries and your dreams. They will stand by you quietly during your storms, never needing credit for their loyalty. They will give you not just their time, but their attention, their empathy, their inner world. For them, love is not a performance. It is a sanctuary. And if you are lucky enough to be loved by an introvert, you will discover a kind of love that is steady, thoughtful, and profoundly sincere. But for introverts themselves, the journey does not end with finding love. It continues with learning how to receive love. This is often the hardest part for them. They must unlearn the belief that they need to earn affection. They must remind themselves that they are worthy of being loved simply for who they are, not for how much they give, how much they adapt, or how well they hide their flaws. They must practice letting people in, even if it feels uncomfortable at first. And they must allow themselves to be seen, truly seen, not just as the listener, the supporter, the quiet anchor, but as a whole human being with desires, vulnerabilities, and needs. True healing for an introvert begins when they realize that their depth is not a liability. It is a gift. Their sensitivity is not a flaw. It is a superpower. Their need for solitude is not a weakness. It is wisdom. And their way of loving, quiet, deliberate, unwavering, is not lesser than the loud, passionate expressions the world glorifies. It is simply different and no less valuable. When they embrace this truth, everything changes. They stop apologizing for who they are. They stop hiding their feelings behind walls of self-protection. They stop chasing love as if it's something they must earn. Instead, they open their hearts with the quiet confidence that they are enough, and that the right people will see the beauty in their stillness. After years of feeling different, after countless moments of being misunderstood, withdrawing into themselves, fearing judgment and questioning their worth, there comes a pivotal moment in every introvert's journey, The moment they realize that everything they once thought was a flaw is actually their greatest gift. This transformation does not happen overnight. It unfolds slowly, almost imperceptibly, in the quiet corners of daily life. It begins the moment they stop trying to be like everyone else and accept that they don't enjoy noisy parties. It begins when they stop apologizing for being too sensitive and start seeing it as their gift for feeling deeply. It begins when they no longer feel guilty for needing solitude and instead guard that inner space as something sacred. Little by little, step by step, they emerge from the shadows of their past, and from the very places that once felt like weakness, they begin to draw immense power. The first source of strength is deep empathy. Because they have been hurt before, introverts learn how to listen beyond words, to hear the tremor in a voice, to notice the sadness behind a forced smile, to recognize the exhaustion hidden beneath a casual, "I'm fine." They can sit beside someone in silence and still offer comfort without needing to say anything at all. In a world obsessed with speed and noise, this depth of presence becomes a rare and precious gift, one that heals, connects, and transforms relationships on a soul level. The second strength is their ability to observe and see beyond the surface. Introverts don't rush. They don't react impulsively to everything happening around them. They pause, reflect, and connect the dots before making decisions. And because of that, they often see what others miss. They don't just notice what is happening. They understand why it is happening. Whether in relationships, careers, or life choices, this clarity allows them to navigate the world with wisdom and insight that runs deeper than logic. The third, and perhaps most profound strength, is their ability to live comfortably with themselves. As children, they may have feared loneliness, but as adults, they discover that solitude is not emptiness. It is fertile ground for self-discovery and growth. In the stillness, they learn to hear their inner voice, to recognize what truly brings them joy, and to build a life that isn't shaped by external expectations. They no longer need constant validation to feel worthy. They no longer need a crowd to feel alive. They are whole within themselves, and that wholeness becomes an unshakable foundation on which they stand. With this newfound strength, their perspective on the world begins to shift. They no longer fear rejection, because they understand that not everyone is capable of connecting as deeply as they do. They no longer dread judgment, because they know their worth is not defined by anyone else's opinion. They no longer avoid their emotions, because they understand that even pain, sadness, fear, anger is a messenger carrying truth from within. And they no longer measure themselves by someone else's standards because they have discovered a standard of their own. Their relationships also begin to change. They stop trying to please everyone. Instead, they choose to form fewer but deeper connections, relationships where they are seen and valued for who they truly are. They no longer seek love as a way to hide from the fear of abandonment. They love as two whole souls walking side by side, supporting each other without clinging. They no longer chase endless social interactions just to fill the silence. They choose quality over quantity, depth over surface. And through this process, they learn one of life's most profound lessons. Their sensitivity is not a burden. It is their compass. Because they feel deeply, they understand what love truly means. Because they once knew pain, they know how to be gentle with it, in themselves and in others. Because they were once misunderstood, they know the power of listening. Because they once closed their hearts, they now understand the beauty of opening them consciously, not out of fear, but out of choice. One day, they realize something remarkable. The very traits that once made them feel out of place are the ones that make them unique. The depth once labeled too sensitive is now their ability to understand others in ways few people can. The silence, once mistaken for insecurity, is now the safe space where others feel deeply accepted. The solitude, once seen as isolation, is now the source of their creativity, peace, and wisdom. All the qualities they were once told to fix have become their superpowers. And that is the moment when the introvert truly steps out of the shadow of their past. They are no longer defined by the labels others placed on them. They no longer live under the weight of society's expectations. They no longer try to become someone they're not. Instead, they embrace their authentic self, free, grounded, deep, and whole. There is a quiet kind of liberation that happens when an introvert finally stops running from themselves. It is not loud or dramatic. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks or grand gestures. Instead, it arrives softly, like dawn breaking after a long night, gentle but unstoppable. And in that moment, everything changes. The story that once defined them, the story of being too quiet, too sensitive, too withdrawn, begins to dissolve. It is replaced by a deeper truth. They were never too much or too little. They were always exactly enough. Their sensitivity was never a flaw, only a sign of how deeply they were capable of feeling. Their solitude was never isolation, only a space where wisdom could grow. Their quietness was never weakness, only the language through which they were meant to connect with the world. This realization is not the end of the journey, it's the beginning of a new one. Because once they stop fighting who they are, introverts gain access to a kind of strength and purpose that was always inside them, waiting to be claimed. They begin to build a life not on the expectations of others, but on the foundation of their own authenticity. They choose relationships that nourish them instead of drain them. They seek work that aligns with their values instead of chasing titles for validation. They design a rhythm of life that respects their need for quiet, reflection, and meaning. A life that isn't about constant stimulation, but about depth and intention. And perhaps, most importantly, they learn that they do not have to fix themselves to belong. They don't need to become louder, more outgoing, or more visible to have an impact. Their presence itself, thoughtful, grounded, observant, is enough to change the spaces they enter. Their silence speaks volumes. Their way of listening can heal. Their capacity to feel deeply allows them to touch others in ways words never could. It is in this state of acceptance that introverts often discover their true calling. Some become creators, writers, artists, filmmakers, weaving the beauty of their inner world into stories that move hearts. Others become guides, therapists, teachers, mentors, offering their wisdom and empathy to those who are lost. And many simply become anchors, friends, partners, parents, whose steady presence brings peace to the lives around them. However it manifests, their power lies not in how loudly they speak, but in how deeply they live. Of course, the journey is not without challenges. There will still be moments of self-doubt, times when the noise of the world feels overwhelming, days when they question whether they belong. But now, they face those moments differently. Instead of shrinking, they breathe. Instead of hiding, they pause. Instead of abandoning themselves, they return inward, to that still, steady place they have built inside. And there, they find strength. One of the most beautiful transformations that occurs is in how introverts relate to others. They no longer chase love from a place of emptiness. They give it from a place of abundance. They no longer cling to relationships out of fear of being alone. They choose them consciously, knowing they are whole even on their own. They no longer let past wounds dictate how much they are willing to open up. They open because they want to, not because they need to. And when they connect with someone, a friend, a lover, a soulmate, the connection is deep, honest, and nourishing. They also redefine success, no longer measured by how visible they are, how many followers they have, or how many rooms they command. Success becomes something quieter, but infinitely more meaningful. It is the ability to spend a day doing what they love without needing anyone's approval. It is the joy of creating something beautiful, even if no one sees it. It is the peace of knowing they are living in alignment with who they truly are. But perhaps the most profound gift of this journey is the relationship they build with themselves. For the first time, they look in the mirror and see not someone who needs fixing, but someone who is whole. They see the child who was once misunderstood and smile at them with compassion. They see the adult who carried heavy wounds and thank them for their resilience. They see the person they are now, sensitive, strong, thoughtful, and free. And they feel a quiet pride that no external validation could ever give. And it's in this place, this space of wholeness and peace, that the introvert's true power unfolds. They realize that they were never meant to walk the same path as everyone else. They were meant to walk a deeper one. They were never meant to speak the loudest. They were meant to listen and understand what others could not hear. They were never meant to stand in the spotlight. They were meant to light the way in the darkness. Their gift is not in doing more. It is in being more present, more aware, more compassionate, more themselves. As the journey comes full circle, one final truth emerges. The very thing they once believed was their greatest weakness is, in fact, their greatest strength. Their depth is their power. Their sensitivity is their wisdom. Their solitude is their sanctuary. And their quiet presence is the force that makes the world softer, kinder, and more human. So if you are an introvert, or if you love one, remember this. You were never broken. You were never lacking. You were simply growing into the person you were always meant to be. And the world does not need you to change who you are. It needs you exactly as you are. Deeply feeling, quietly powerful, beautifully whole. And perhaps, after all this time, you will come to see that the silence you once feared is not empty. It is full of strength, full of wisdom, full of love, and full of the extraordinary life that has been waiting for you all along. If this journey spoke to your soul, if it helped you understand yourself or someone you love on a deeper level, I invite you to stay. Subscribe to this channel and join a community of quiet minds and deep hearts where we explore the beauty of depth, the power of silence, and the art of becoming whole. And if you feel called to share, leave a comment below. Tell me, what part of your inner world are you ready to embrace today?